Thank you for being here, everyone. We're live from New York. This is Angular versus React, an environment where it depends is not an answer. We're really getting to the bottom of this tonight. Representing React, I have Chad and Drew to my right. Representing Angular, I have Ryan and Michael. And judging tonight, we have Doug, Johnny, Stan, and Lee. And this is not a presidential debate, so there will be no childish name calling of any kind. Everyone will be respectful. They'll be given a few rounds of discussion. There will be some audience questions. And towards the end, we're going to have the Twitter folks vote on the most valuable debater, so who really stood out. Each team will have 4 minutes to make their opening remarks, and then each team will have 4 minutes to rebut this first round. So let's get this thing started.
So I'm going to be making a case why Angular is a better choice than React. My opponents, these two gentlemen over here, are going to try and argue that features and functionality are how you decide which is better. Now, I don't disagree those are important metrics, but I'm going to argue that opportunity is just as important, if not more so. What do I mean by opportunity? I'd like to think that I'm like most of you. I love playing with the latest and greatest stuff. Hell, I have a Cosmo robot. I don't know if any of you know what a Cosmo robot is. It's a little thing that Anki created. It's got some AI built into it. It's the coolest friggin' thing in the world. But it's lacking features, and quite frankly, it's a novelty item. I certainly don't want my career to function the same way. So I want to make sure that what I specialize in isn't a novelty, because let's face it, there aren't many job opportunities for novelty products. Sure, those jobs might be higher paying, but they're also harder to find. Why does that matter? If you had a boss you can't stand, worked at a startup that's circling the drain maybe, buried under technical debt that you never seem to have time to clean up and it's making your life miserable, or any one of the other million reasons why you hate your job, I don't know about you, but I'd like to know that I can move on from the job I'm at nice and easily. I want to know that the skills I've acquired are in high demand. So let's bring this back to the debate and look at the opportunities available to Angular and React developers. Sorry, I'm going to have some numbers for you guys, so bear with me. I looked at Stack Overflow. They did a 2017 developer survey, and out of 64,000 developers, Angular usage grew 11% year over year, from 32% to 43%. React didn't even appear in 2016 survey. They did garner a respectable number this year, but with some new competitors, are those trends really going to continue? I'm not so sure. But given all those numbers, I just naturally assumed there'd be more job opportunities for Angular developers. And well, I looked at LinkedIn a few days ago and pretty much confirmed that. There were almost 9,000 Angular jobs available and just over 1,000 React positions. So that's a whopping 88%, almost 90% fewer positions available for React developers. So if we crunch those numbers even more, just to put it in real simple terms, if you're an Angular developer, you only need to compete with 3 other developers for a job. That's it. If you're a React developer, however, you got 11 other people fighting for that same job. I'll be honest, I'm a good developer. I'm definitely not a great developer, and I'm certainly not in the top 1%. In fact, statistically, maybe 2 of you are in the top 1%. So for those reasons, I'm an Angular proponent, and I would continue to choose Angular again and again. And I think at the end of this debate, you're going to agree with me and say Angular is the better framework choice. Team Angular.
How's everybody doing tonight? Good. Yeah? All right. So my name is Chad, as you heard before, and I am going to be giving some opening statements about my team, Team React, and the technology behind that. Oh, sure. Sorry about that. So the Unix philosophy emphasizes building simple, short, clear, modular, and extensible code, a philosophy that has endured for over 40 years based on really simple but boring ideas. Write programs that do one thing and do it well. Write programs that work with each other. Write programs to handle text streams, because that is a universal interface. The philosophy of React emphasizes simplicity, modularity, and composition. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? React is declarative. The code should describe what the app should be doing and doesn't get lost on how to do it and proprietary information and knowledge to do so. It's component-based, focusing on modular code that is reusable and easily maintained. Has a one-way data flow, always data down and actions up. Explicit mutations, making it easy to understand the flow of data, making component behavior more predictable. You know what else is declarative? HTML and CSS. So as you can see, they all kind of play well together. React is simple and accessible to developers of any level. The public API for React can be reduced to two simple functions, create element and render. Combine these two functions with arrays and objects, and a beginner developer can be effective with React almost overnight. Contrasting with Angular, where a developer needs to know about components, decorators, selectors, templates, classes, before they can even do anything. Some things that are specific to React aren't as complicated. Like we were talking about the render method, there's also things like component did mount, which is invoked immediately after a component is mounted. It's pretty easy to understand to the person just coming into the framework, or the library, I'm sorry, it's not a framework. React is modular and works well with other libraries. React provides a component definition and lifecycle model that keeps our stack lightweight and concise. This gives us the freedom to choose only the tools we need and allowing us to move forward with technology as it evolves. We can apply this freedom to choose the best tools for things like application architecture. There's things like Flux, Redux, and Mobix. Side effects, you have Redux Saga, you have Redux Observables. Routing, there is a handful of routers out there that you can use, and animations like React Motion and Animated. Contrast with Angular, where the choices are between the Angular way and nothing. React is also for the users. React can be used across many target platforms, client-side web, server-side web, iOS, Android. React can be used across many domains like the command line, inside of design tools, graphic processing, audio processing, VR, AR, and 3D. Being able to target these platforms and domains enables us as developers to build the best possible tool for our users' use. Another nice feature with React is that it supports server-side rendering, which solves a lot of performance issues and SEO problems that has plagued single-page applications for a very long time. Making these applications search engine friendly makes them more accessible to the audience with little to no effort on the developer's behalf. Lastly, designing an application with React, we focus on composition, and every component serves a single purpose of the application. It's important for developers to focus on how the user will use the application, and outstanding usability and experience should be what the developer strives for. With React, we can create simple and intuitive applications with exceptional usability, with the user always in mind. Just like the Unix philosophy has endured for 20 years, the web has endured for 20 years, being based on modular components and composition. The React component model and the capabilities it brings to the web will have an enduring impact on the web now and far into the future. Thank you.
So we had our opening statements. Angular focused a little bit more on opportunity and backed it with some numbers. And React focused a little bit more about the inherent value and design patterns used within the library. And now we're going to give each team the opportunity to rebut the other team's points, given the same amount of time. So let's have Angular begin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Slotty, and I wanted to take the opportunity to kind of discuss some of the features and benefits that the React team has brought up. One of the biggest things that I repeatedly heard was the modularity of the application, and it was a component-driven library. Well, I don't know if that many of you are familiar with this, but we have moved from Angular 1 to Angular 2. In fact, we've moved from Angular 2 to Angular 4. where we have this same component-driven structure for applications. When we talk about this one-way data binding, in your Angular applications, your data trickles down in this one-way data binding structure, but I have the added benefit if I need reactivity based on forms, or if I want my data to trickle back up, I can do that with very little work. In fact, I just declare it, and it works. Instead of if I wanted to take a React approach, I'd have to write God knows what logic just to be able to get my data back up. And when we talk about the framework getting out of the way and just allowing the developers to do what they need to do, if I have to spend my time worried about how I'm going to get my data back and forth through the application, do I really want to be limited with what is provided as just a one-way flow, and I have to figure out how to do my two-way flow of my data? When we talk about some of the other benefits that React provides, they talked about it's component-driven, that the only things that you need to worry about are render and create. Well, with my Angular applications, I can, in roughly 29 characters, start an entire project with my routing configured, with my SAS configured, everything I need to go to start writing code. With an extra 14 characters, my component is created with my HTML structure laid out for me so I can start writing the HTML that I want associated to my component, and then I just bind it to the code that I want it to be associated to. They talk about it providing freedom to do whatever you want. That lack of standards means that there's a knowledge gap between developers. That means if you want to be able to contribute to another project that uses React as a framework, you might have to learn some of the specific oddities to that project. In Angular, because we have standards, any developer can come into any other project and be able to contribute meaningful code right away. Another thing to consider is when everything is so loose, you end up having the same problem where your router will break. Let me just make sure I get this number right. I believe it was close to 3 or 4 times in the past 6 months. If I want to make sure my code is working, I would appreciate stability in the code that I develop. A lot of these things that they talk about are things that Angular already does. If you want server-side rendering, go to universal.angular.io. You have everything you need. In fact, they provide a template project. But if you want to get started making your own React project, you're either using someone else's code with God knows what dependencies just to get up and going, or you can write it yourself, which, again, how long do you want to spend getting your project up and running? Like I said, in sub 30 characters, you can have a project with routing, styling, and everything else needed right out the door. Thank you.
Yeah, that's not. Can't wait for the whole DOM to re-render.
It's going virtually. All right, I'm Drew. All right, let's tear this apart. You mentioned the modularity issue and the two-way binding, but you have this crazy, insane syntax to do it. You have to learn all these extra characters to put in your templates, which is just no way you can possibly learn all those things, teach that thing to other people. You mentioned 29 characters to get your application up and running. npm install create React app is 28 characters. The Angular router that shipped with version 1 they never fixed it. You had to pull in a third-party dependency for the entire time you were doing Angular 1 stuff and use UI router instead. Now, the developer survey that you mentioned, there's actually a really cool bit in there where they did most loved and most dreaded technologies that you could use. Most loved was Angular with 51, React with 66. Most dreaded was 48% to Angular, 33% to React. So both wins there for React. Now, in a world where Angular is one of the most dreaded frameworks possible, where developers are upset, angry, unproductive from all the awkward framework complexity and abstractions that you have there, that's really not a good win for anybody. But for those who want to, who are already using React and loving it, let's encourage all our friends here to get on that board with React as well and be happy, empowered developers building great things for our users. You mentioned opportunities. So yes, I went and looked for a few jobs. There were 949 Angular jobs on Glassdoor. There were 24 React jobs. Now that's a big difference, but React is just JavaScript. So if you turn it around and look for just JavaScript jobs, there are 4,222 jobs on that. So a significant increase there if you just know JS. And the more JS you know, the better you are at React. And lastly, React was created by millennials to build applications for millennials. And you know what's cool? Millennials. Angular was built for the enterprise. It was built by the enterprise. It's used and abused by the enterprise. You know what's not cool? The enterprise. Now, I work for an enterprise with a bunch of millennials, and we use React. For these reasons, you should vote for React.
All right. Thanks for each team getting the opportunity to state their case and rebut the other team's case. Now we are going to take questions from the judges, and each team answers will be given 2 minutes to answer the questions the judges asked. So let's kick it off with some judging questions.
Based on what you said, I'm bringing in, let's just say I'm bringing in 10 developers. No framework experience, no library experience, they just know a little bit of JS. Let's say they're coming straight out of college. Explain to me why using a React or Angular would be better to bring them up to speed.
So to answer your question about bringing in new developers that are straight out of college, that they have some programming skills, some classes they probably took, and they have some JavaScript experience. I would argue for the case that React would be the way to go. React being based heavily using JavaScript, there's a handful of domain-specific methods inside of React that the developer would have to learn, but it pales in comparison to the domain-specific syntax and patterns that they would have to learn in Angular. For example, to create a list is the same way you would create a list just using vanilla JavaScript. So to answer your question, React being built on and employing vanilla JavaScript inside of itself, React would be the way to go.
I love the question, by the way. As someone who has hired 10 front-end developers, all working on an Angular application, I think I might actually be uniquely positioned to answer the question. There's a whole bunch of different reasons why. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, they're all standards. When you come in as a junior level developer, typically those are the first things that you're exposed to. And I would argue that it's not only developers that come into the front-end world, it's also designers that come into the front-end world. And it's really important that we make the framework accessible to everybody. I've heard a lot of comments just pervasively about how designers don't belong in code. But the reality is, a lot of developers don't have an eye for vision. So making something easily accessible to designers is what's going to allow us to actually keep making really pretty, really beautiful websites. Getting back to the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript standards, Angular tends to be a framework that layers on top of those standards as opposed to mashing them all up into a single file that then has its own unique syntax that the documentation is very specific to React as opposed to if I need help with DOM structuring or if I need help with CSS layout or scaffolding, there's tons of documentation out there that are going to help me get up to speed extremely quick, especially because that's stuff that I am familiar with as a junior level developer. Now, what worked for me is also having senior level developers on the team as well, so some of the more complicated aspects of Angular are very easily translated for them. Making sure you've got documentation in place is really important as well. But again, just having those standards and easy ramp up time, it's just, it's a no-brain win.
So millennials do work in enterprises as well. So my question would be, how does your technology enable support for legacy browsers such as like, let's say IE9? What's the story behind that? Is there an easy path for that or what?
In regards to your question, how does our framework work with legacy browsers like Internet Explorer 9? From last I've checked, and I doubt this has changed recently, Angular 2 and both Angular 1 has support for IE9. And what comes better when we discuss the support when we're talking about long-term sustainability of our framework is chances are your browser has visited an Angular 1 website, it has worked just fine, and your browser has cached everything needed to run that Angular 1 application. I think it's not as big of an issue when we talk about support for those older browsers because most of these frameworks already have it, but it's been a point for the development process to include support for that. And when it comes to the Angular 2 or Angular 4 world, because we use Microsoft technology TypeScript handles all of the transpilation to be able to be supported in Internet Explorer environments. Thank you.
Cool. So React is 8 compatible, if I remember correctly. It was 8 or 9. It's around there as the cutoff. But the really thing you want to aim for with those older browsers is just shipping less code to the browser. You want to have the application run as little JS as possible because they just don't have the right sort of JS engine. They're not as capable. So React works really well because we can render on the server side and ship pre-rendered HTML. We can cache all that and give a progressive enhancement environment to applications running in those older browsers. And as the browsers get more modern, we can enable more features fairly easily by the component composition model that we have.
So my question is more for not going back, but going forward. What has your library or framework? What are its principles or the things you could build with it that when, let's say in 6 months' time, there's a new flavor of the week, and it's not Angular anymore, it's something else, it's Vue, or if it's not React anymore, it's Preact, or some other thing comes out. What can you leverage from what your existing code bases or your existing knowledge to use for these new libraries and frameworks?
It's a great question because as developers, we should always kind of keep our eye on the future. And I think being a developer, it's kind of important for us to always kind of look to the future and see what's coming out and get our hands in it and play with it. So that being said, one of the major movements right now within the web is web components itself. Web components being pretty much the future of the web and is here. And you can even see, Google had first Polymer JS, which was a component library. We have React now. There you could write components in vanilla JavaScript. And even now, Angular, the new version of Angular is actually supporting web components. So that being said, being React is specifically designed to be a library that builds web components. It's very easy for us to move forward with the future, to the future and move with the future and develop for new technology and stuff like that. And that's the beautiful part of React. React does one thing and does one thing well. It builds web components. And everything else around it is up to us, the developer, to incorporate with whatever task we're trying to accomplish. Thank you.
I think that was a great question, actually. First, I don't see Angular as actually a flavor. It's interesting. Our opponents actually brought one thing up that I found really interesting. Angular is not written by millennials. It's written for the enterprise. And if you look at where Angular actually exists right now, it's out on sites right now that are not that adaptable. They're in it for the long term, and they chose Angular. There's a reason why they chose Angular. And not only did they choose Angular, a lot of them version 1, but the Angular team is actually trying to ease the transition for those 1 applications into 2 applications so that it becomes easier and easier. So here you've got a framework that is already sitting in the enterprise, and it's already ready to go. Developers are using it all the time, so it's not a flavor. It's here to stay. If I log into my Chase account and I see Angular is running there, or Capital One. I should have said Capital One because they're sponsoring this. I'm pretty sure I saw Angular running there at 1.2. I'm probably wrong about that now, though. It's in the enterprise. They're the ones that pay our paychecks. I'm sticking with where my money comes from. So that's it. Thanks.
So my question is about type safety, which is an important consideration for any technology. Both React and Angular are built with this in mind, and I would like to know why your technology does it better.
I actually love that you brought up this question only because my shift into using Angular 2 and now Angular 4, type safety has been one of the most beautiful and wonderful things in the world for me. Out of curiosity, how many of the developers in this room use Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code? A good amount of you. So you probably are familiar with, as you are typing your code and you're calling libraries or you're calling other functions that you import in your classes, you can immediately see what the arguments accepted are and what the types should be. This puts you in the mindset of what your application, how you should be structuring it all the time. It doesn't leave room for error for you to make a mistake, not catch it. It'll tell you immediately. Also, I think it was mentioned before for millennials coming out of school when it comes to job opportunities, I am in college right now. I just got out of a final and I came here. And Angular was one of my first web experience. Thank you. Writing Angular code was one of my first web development experiences where my university didn't necessarily provide the strongest web background, but we learned Java. And I'm sure there are many students and many people whose first introduction to programming in school comes from a type-safe language like Java or C. Your transition into the type-safe language of TypeScript for your Angular 2, Angular 4 code makes it so easy for you to be able to ramp up and build production quality code right from the get-go. And the tools that you have with Visual Studio Code makes it just that much better. Thank you.
Been instructed to hold this very closely. All right, so type safety is fantastic in React because we can do it not just at compile time with either Flow or TypeScript, which are both they're both fantastic tools. TypeScript is amazing and enables all of Visual Studio Code autocomplete stuff for JS. It's fantastic. Building tools on top of TypeScript to augment your JavaScript is amazing. It's been a great enabler for what I've been building with React. But React also lets you do typing at runtime as well. So we can use tools like prop types. There's another tool called tcomb, and lets you build very complex models to structure the data that's coming in at runtime. So even if you're getting data off the wire that you don't entirely trust, you can serialize it into a structure that you have a pretty good idea is going to match what you expect and get validated at runtime. So being able to target both sides of the equation at compile time, at runtime, and get great validation results out of it and build tooling based on those things is a really great enabler of choosing React. And that's why you should vote for React.
That concludes judge questions. The next round is audience questions. So we're going to take a few questions from the audience. So let's get some hands up now if you have some questions. And I am going to go hand the mic to anyone asking a question. So we'll take the first question here.
The same rules that apply.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I invested a lot of time in learning Angular, and I'm really here to see whether I should switch to React. The challenge is, from a database, generate an entire form on the fly. And so you have to render this form. You have to have a builder in the browser that can take the JavaScript and generate on the fly the list of components, which are checkboxes, radio buttons, etc. So, and the only way I've seen of generating a form on the fly, I found one on Egghead.io which uses a renderer type function that enables you to generate a form on the fly. And is this not clear?
Can we have who wants to volunteer to sort of address this question? And then you'll have 2 minutes after.
Cool. So just to, I suppose, summarize the question, we've got a complex data object coming in. We want to be able to take that complex data object and turn it into a rendered, highly dynamic UI based on that structure. Right. This is a perfect fit for React, because for each one of those different component types that you have, you define a different component for that. You have well-known data that needs to go into it. You can define that API, that contract, using one of the static typing methods or one of the runtime verification methods. And then for each one of those components, you can have another component around it that has a switch or has a map that knows how to map from whatever the data key that you switch on to the component that it should render. And the thing with React is you can have that map of what the components are, like really easily defined, and it's not going to create them until you actually run that bit of code. So you can have your definitions all written out with just functions returning the component that it needs to render. So there's very like function composition, being able to do, you can do things like curry your functions, so you can pass in a little bit of the configuration and then pass in more of the configuration later. And all those things let you just have a really clear, concise description of what each component is, how to render it, and how to compose them together.
No matter what, the issue that you face with having a custom form based on 30 different fields is going to be a complex task to address. And what I heard from the React side is, oh, with 30 different types of fields, why don't you write 30 more components that will be conditionally thrown in order to handle all that? Above and beyond all of that, it's being, correct me if I'm mistaken, you said that the fields are being dynamically chosen based on previous inputs. So how much more work with these listener events that you're going to have to write yourself to see when this data changes are you going to have to make to be able to produce this form? With my Angular application, I can just collect the object of what the form should look like, and then just do conditional binding in my template based on what the inputs are. That way, I don't have to write listeners to look at when this data changes or when the user makes an input. It happens automatically for me. Above and beyond that, when you're writing a form, especially if you're writing an enterprise-level application, you want to be able to run validations against this data in real time. With the Angular form builder, I can run validations all the time, and as soon as something changes or something doesn't look right, I can trigger fail-safes to catch this, or modify the view based on what the user inputs, kind of like what you wanted. I don't know, being able to just do one component that handles everything or writing 30 different components for these specific elements, that just doesn't sound good to me.
All right, thank you. So let's take another question from the audience. Let's do you right over here.
Okay, both React and Angular are relatively young platforms. How do they compare with some older, more mature platforms like Ember and Meteor?
All right. Would you like to address this first, Angular?
I think I can't really make this argument without also making an argument for React in the process, so I'm going to try and do my best here. The alternatives, the older staying power, I would actually argue that's probably not even true. I can't find an application that's running Backbone anymore. That's like saying what sites are still running, still using jQuery. There's a few out there. But the problem with those platforms is they haven't matured. And where I can actually differentiate from the React team is Angular's actually been around for, I think it's going on about 7 years now. So it does have some staying power. And like I'd mentioned in previous responses as well, we're in the enterprise. It's got staying power. And I think that Angular's done a really good job of unseating those incumbents like Backbone. And I honestly, it's been so long since I've even heard them brought up. It's like thinking about MooTools also, or Scriptaculous. Nobody uses them anymore. Angular's been around for a long time. It's in the enterprise. It's got some significant staying power. It's got a lot of momentum behind it. And I don't think those incumbents have really kept pace. Their contributor counts have gone down. People just aren't contributing to them anymore, and they've died. If you're still using it at this point, it's for legacy reasons until you've adopted one of the newer platforms. I made your argument for you.
All right. So Meteor is a good one because it sort of really kicked off a lot of real-time data subscription stuff, so enabling like 2 different browsers to communicate really clearly and easily. And they built that through a component-based metaphor and the subscription mechanism there. It's a good tool if that's solving your problem of real-time data subscriptions and you have the infrastructure in place for that works. That's fine. On the Ember side, so Angular is really quite a Java-esque style framework, whereas Ember's like the Ruby version of a framework. So it's very much associated with all the Ruby language and the Ruby team and the applications there. Like Yehuda Katz came out of Ruby on Rails, just poke fun at Ryan, because who's not a fan of Yehuda Katz. But like Ember's, again, a solid, mature platform. If it's meeting your needs, then it works. But to get to the point of which one of our 2 we should go with, speaking of staying power, Facebook's been around for a while. It's going to be around for a while longer. You should go with React.
All right, can we get a few more hands up? All right, I'll pick you right here.
So I'm actually a user experience designer, so I'm coming from left field a little bit here. But why would you say your program is more optimal to communicate with your design team? Because as much as we all like to work in a vacuum, we can't. So why is your program better for working for designers and building out that optimal UX?
I would love to answer this question because myself, I actually started off as a designer that transitioned over into a developer. And I'm going to argue the fact that I think React is really great for that. Again, I'm going to talk about React's component model. Okay, when you work with a designer, the designer kind of puts everything out and lays everything out in a bunch of boxes, right? Us as developers take those boxes, kind of think about how those boxes kind of work with one another and the relationships with one another. And we can do that very easily by building these components out. And once we have these components built out, we can kind of figure out how they interact with each other. And we can go back and give the designer a one-to-one comparison to what his mock was compared to what's the actual proof of concept. So I think if you're looking for a more of a design-centric background and thought process to actually developing, React is the winner on this one.
One of the arguments, and it's an interesting question in regards to how does the development side with using either Angular or React tie with the design side. And there was the point thrown around that React is component driven, so you can work on individual modular components, make sure that styling matches and move forward. Angular is component driven as well, so that it essentially becomes a moot point at some point when you can do the same things. In fact, with the designers that we have in-house with the company I work at, we work with them on a constant basis in order to get the design right. We do a lot of stuff. I believe our designers use an application called Sketch. I'm not a professional designer, so I don't have the best knowledge of this. But we just take in a lot of the predefined styles that they give us in our style guide. We just copy and paste it into our global SAS file. And then from there, we just build out the individual components. I think what's really most important there is that your development team has strong communication with the designers, because it is component driven for both frameworks. You can get framework and library, you can get what you want out of it. But I think some of the standardization with using SAS, CSS, and doing better conditional styling with Angular templates, instead of me having to do some crazy thing with class names as a field in my item in order to get the styling I want, I think for a designer wanting to modify the code, it'll be easier for them to use Angular.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to point out one of these mics doesn't work, and we left it on the podium for some reason, and I think it's been grabbed a couple times. It's kind of the equivalent of commenting out code instead of just deleting it. So I'm going to leave with this. The next, like this was here. It was kind of like over to the side, but this really should have been gotten rid of. So one last question in this period. So let's get some hands up. All right, you in the orange.
So my question is about debugging. Let's say that I accidentally, and this never happens, but put a bug in my code. And now I can figure out how to fix that. What about your framework is going to help me, or library, help me find this bug, and how do you assist me as a developer if I have to debug someone else's code that maybe I didn't write and I don't know a lot about?
Ideally, no one wants to have to deal with a bug in their code. It could, for a new developer coming into the project not familiar, it might be hard for them to pinpoint exactly what it is. But taking a look at the tools that Angular provides, the Angular CLI, as you develop out your classes, components, directives, etc., it will stub out test files for you. So right off the bat, you don't have to configure or set up an entire environment in order to be able to run tests against the code that you have. Not just that, with using Visual Studio Code, which is probably the preferred IDE when you're writing TypeScript, you get to see right away what arguments your classes and functions take. That way you know you're writing safe code from the get-go. And let's say if all else fails, the Angular CLI actually uses ahead-of-time compilation, which means as soon as there's a break in your code, screen goes black, you will immediately see what the error is and where it is, instead of being surprised when you navigate to that route and all of a sudden, boom, it doesn't work.
So on the React side, we have all of that. But we also have a bunch of other things as well. One of the key ones is called snapshot testing. So you can take your component, you render it, you get all the properties as it would be in the DOM, as it would look, but rendered out to a little JSON file. So what happens is the next time you run that test and it doesn't match, it'll tell you, and it'll really clearly pick out that you changed the class name and you haven't updated your test yet. Or you changed your behavior and it's rendering something it shouldn't be doing. And the thing about the snapshot testing and the tool that runs it, Jess, is it just runs it really fast. And it runs them all in parallel and gives you results way faster than any of the Angular tools or anything built on, like Karma's slow, Ava's not too good either. Whereas Jess is like fast, get your answer, keep moving, get the red-green refactor cycle going. The type safety stuff comes up again. You can do it at compile time. You can do your ahead-of-time testing, get that validation in place. But you also can do your runtime testing. Runtime validation as well. But the whole thing is, with React, you're going to be writing smaller pieces, smaller components, which have less behavior, which means there's determining which one of these crazy branches that you have in your 150,000 line long Angular template goes wrong is really hard. When you have a component that is only a couple of lines long, it's got maybe one branch in it, it's really easy to find where those problems are. And as you render either deeply or shallowly and render just that component itself and none of its children, you can help identify those pieces far more easily than having to run the application, which is what Angular always has to run the application to be able to determine anything. Whereas being able to just get the right answer very quickly at test time gives you an answer straight away and you can keep moving on. And by the way, I've got that same shirt in green. So, thanks.
All right, well, why don't we do one more question from the audience? Let's get some hands up. Anybody from this side have any questions? You had your eyes on me?
To what degree do companies that have offered these frameworks actually use their own frameworks?
All right, Angular? Or React? So this is the final round of these questions, and then we will give each team a chance to make a final argument, and React will start with the final argument as well. So, but let's have the final portion of this portion.
To answer your question, So React is built from the developers at Facebook. And Facebook is actually actively using React, actively using React on the front end of Facebook. Or Facebook is actually using React on the front end of Facebook, actively, currently. So that being said, it's a tried true, put your money where your mouth is type of thing. Again, if it's good enough for Facebook, it should be good enough for you guys. Vote React.
It's funny, just because the authoring organization uses the framework that they're proposing at the scale that they're using it, doesn't necessarily mean I would still want to use it. The human capital costs behind Facebook's use of React is enormous. And with LTS support for a major version only being 2 versions out and them lasting a whopping year, I think, at the most right now, you're going to be going back and rewriting those components unbelievably regularly. If you look at Google's homepage, it hasn't changed since. I'm not a millennial, and I think I was in diapers when the Google homepage changed. So I think it's completely reasonable that Angular is not actually sitting on the Google homepage. But Google actually is using Angular for a number of their other smaller applications. And smaller is still relative because it's Google scale. They're still sizable. Google Voice, I think parts of YouTube use it. And outside of just the authoring framework, outside of the authoring company, the enterprise is contributing to this framework. People have dedicated resources from other companies to this framework. And I personally want to get behind a framework that has a massive community level amount of support across the enterprise, because those are the people that stay in business. The smaller companies that choose to use React, it's a tough call, and it's going to end up costing you and your company a lot more money, just because you're going to have to keep going back and rewriting. The UI router got rewritten 3 times in the last 5 months, so good luck, Facebook.
So now we're going to give each team a chance for a 3-minute closing statement. And then the judges are going to go off, and you folks at home are going to get a chance to vote for the most valuable debater. So give that some thought right now. And let's hear the final closing arguments from React.
So as my counterpart over here mentioned earlier, opportunity is important, right? Sure, it's everything. And as you can see with the numbers we were talking about earlier, sure, the market might be a bit shallow for React developers, but the market is gigantic for JavaScript developers. And React being a JavaScript library, I feel that falls into that category. Talking more about the philosophy and the idea behind React, taking from the Unix philosophy with that approaches a minimalist and modular fashion way of coding, building simple, short, clear, and extensible code that's easier to debug, easier to evolve with the times, and it allows developers and designers to work one-on-one with each other and build a really beautiful product. Not to mention that things like VR, AR, and 3D have already been employed using React through third-party libraries. So if you guys are concerned about the future of your application, what tomorrow may bring, just keep in mind that React is a UI library focused on building components, web components. Web components are the future. So much that actually Angular now is incorporating components into their library or into their framework. But the thing about Angular you have to remember, it's Angular's way or the highway. With React, you can kind of experiment, build a better product through discovering new technologies and employing those new technologies, and keep your team on its bleeding edge. I feel that React.js is the obvious choice here, and please vote React. Thank you very much.
So there's a couple of things. Getting back to the simplicity of the framework, someone over here asked a question about how designers could get involved. And what I actually heard was sit down with a developer because they know the code. I prefer to actually sit down and hand off the code. That's why I like having my CSS and my HTML separate. Empower the designers, empower the people that make the tool look good. I used to be an ActionScript developer. Yeah, there we go. So what's really interesting about that, ActionScript 2 was extremely approachable. Designers could come in and it was approachable. Anybody could get in and create this amazing, amazing interactive experience back in 2000. But when ActionScript 3 came out, it became a developer-only tool. And as it became a developer-only tool, you started to see the quality of those designs start to deteriorate. And the only thing that you started to see Flash for was nice little pretty ad banners. And I'm not sitting here advocating for Flash. Believe me, that's not what I'm doing. What I'm advocating for is ease and accessibility of the language that you choose to work within. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, they're standard. And Angular just layers on top of that. If you understand the standards, it's very easy for you to get in. And our opponents actually mentioned components. Yes, NG2 is component-based. But what's really interesting is it really comes down to how you architect your application. You need to have someone that's actually thinking out your application because you can make a pile of doo-doo out of a React app, but you can also make a pile of doo-doo out of any app, honestly. It all depends on who you've got working on it. I'm not going to call any particular demographic out either. But the size of your component, it's up to the developer how big or small your component is. So I can write a 3-line component in Angular. You can write a 3-line component in React. It's a negligible argument. You mentioned VR, AR, and 3D and how React is really being embraced in that environment. I don't know about the rest of you, but I can't even afford an Oculus device. So great. It's being used in a device I can't afford, and I'm imagining, considering I know what the average pay scale is for people here and the cost of living, you can't either. They also mentioned that React's got a tool for that. React's got a library for that. How many tools and how many libraries does React have for that? Granted, Angular is opinionated, but it's opinionated where it needs to be. It gives you one central place, one definitive location for you to find all the information that you need. The community has actually ramped up and gotten behind that. React, they mentioned how many different libraries and tools. I find it hard enough just to keep up with the flavor of the day and the tool of the week, let alone needing to keep up with 30 different routers and 15 different libraries that all do the same thing and which one's getting community support and which one's not. It's just mind-boggling. So again, good luck to Facebook. Keep eating it. On top of that, yes, React is on the bleeding edge. Like I said, to bring it all the way back to my opening statement, it's about opportunity. I don't want to be on the bleeding edge because enterprise doesn't want to be on the bleeding edge. Maybe your startup wants to be on the bleeding edge, but here's some really cold, hard numbers. In the first year, 99% of you are going to fail. So you're out of a job. Boom. Second year, another 99% of you are going to fail. I want to be where I'm going to have a job tomorrow. That's what's really important to me. That's what the differentiating factor is. Like I said in the beginning, features, functionality, yes, they're important, but so is continuity. So is making sure that you got some money behind it. And as much as that sucks to hear, that's what keeps everything going. That's the drive of the machine. So that's why I think you should absolutely vote for Angular. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you to both teams for their closing remarks and to the audience for the awesome questions. Now the judges are going to get out of here for 5 minutes and deliberate, and we're going to get an answer on who they think the winner of this competition is.
2017 thing, I think it's amazing that React.
How do you think the millennial thing kind of played out in the debate? What did you sort of what were your thoughts of that? Did it sort of did it get to you? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess I can absolutely kind of touch on that topic. What I kind of heard is that React is cool, React is popular, it does this, or that. But you get a lot of that same thing with Angular, and it comes to a matter of choice. You have the stability and long-term support that you get with Angular 1. If you want to take that future-looking, break all the things approach, you can do that as well with Angular 2. I like that ability to go back and forth. And I think that kind of went to show between the different types of users that exist on the Angular platform, where I'd consider myself to be closer to the millennial. And yes, I have all the opportunities using Angular as a tool. But if you want to think about it at the enterprise level, yes, you have the stability you need too. It's an interesting point, but I think Angular offers the flexibility to do both.
So how do you think it went?
Fantastically. It was really, we got some good zingers in there through the flow. I think Ryan came through with a couple of good ones in his closing comments. It's going to be tight.
Do you trust the judges on this one?
They were definitely paying attention to our arguments. Like they knew where they needed to get more information. They knew where they needed to probe a little bit more to help us make sure we were framing the right arguments or going in the right direction. And they should absolutely keep voting for React.
All right. AR and VR was mentioned. I was a little surprised native wasn't mentioned. It was kind of like...
It was a fault of not being able to type or write fast enough. It was get the first couple of points out, and then it was time to stand up and do that presentation. But the React Native, being able to use the same language, the same sort of component structure, composition, the same sort of patterns, means that as we use React and learn more about JS and the web and HTML, JS, and CSS for styling and all those sort of things, those skills become transferable. And using those concrete implementations in the standard languages for the web then means you can get some experience with that and move to the more abstract of those concepts of styling a component and being able to use those same constructs as you work in native, and you get a bit of more cross-training. And again, talking to the job opportunity thing, being cross-trained across multiple platforms is a great enabler to a developer. And you may find that you may start on the web side, cross-train into doing more native work, and find that environment is just a better fit for your skills, your environment, your career growth and where you want to go.
Have you voted on the poll for most valuable developer? How are you going to win if you don't vote?
I've been talking to you. I didn't want to
I want you to go. I'm going to go right now, and I'm going to vote. I don't know if I'm going to vote for you necessarily. You're a little...
You're looking very nice today, man.
The whole React team...
You're an excellent MC.
The Angular team was a lot better with the mic, I found. They did a better job of not letting it stray from their mouth.
Some of us are very animated with our hands.
The buttoned-up, enterprisey folks kind of seem to sort of understand the technology a little bit. I don't know. I'm just sharing.
You should vote for the people in the black shirts with the cats on them,
which makes it really easy for you to screw things up too.
All right, everybody. The results. Let's settle down. All right, everybody. The most valuable debater tonight, Ryan from Angular. And we have a gift. We have a gift for Ryan. So Ryan, come here. Let's. What does this mean to you that you were named the most valuable debater in the React versus Angular TechDuels debate?
Apparently, I'm the master debater, and I can't wait to bring the Google home. All
right,
It means everything to me.
So it looks like we have a Google Home for Ryan of Angular. You know, it might have been a little weird if the Google prize went to. So
yeah, seriously, where's Facebook here?
There's no.
You came into enemy territory from the beginning.
All right, but congratulations to Ryan for kicking a lot of butt tonight. Now, it really only matters. This is a team sport right here, so.
I have the results I'm going to announce.
Ooh, all right.
That was quick.
We have the results.
First, I'm very proud to see my debaters up here. You guys did amazing. So in the end, all of you won, but truthfully, that's bullshit. So here's the Let me first start by saying that the decision was unanimous for Team React.
All right, can we ask the judges, anybody want to talk about why you chose React?
Sure. I mean, obviously, you shouldn't, misinterpret the unanimous vote for like a blowout. It was actually very close. It's just that when the React presentations were being given, we definitely got more of a sense of not necessarily being something that you settle for in the future. We all like the consistency of the enterprise and being able to be nice and stable. But if anything has shown us in the JavaScript world in particular, that things change very, very quickly. And if you're not adept for responding to that change, then you're going to be left behind very quickly. And so you do see a lot of enterprises and large corporations that have a lot of legacy code bases, and a lot of millennials don't like working on those. And if you want your company to continue to improve and thrive and have the latest and greatest talent, then you have to be willing to move forward. So that was it.
I'll just echo the same exact thing that he just said, which is that just because it was unanimous doesn't mean it wasn't close. It was, we were all really, really close. We thought you guys did a great job. All your arguments were awesome. It was super fun. So everybody should feel really good. It was, even though it was unanimous, it was like every individual person was really close. So congratulations to all of you. I think you did an awesome, awesome job. It was awesome.
All right, round of applause for everybody here, including the audience members. All right, thank you for coming, everybody.
Yes. That was a lot of fun, even though I lost. I'm not a sore loser.
We're all locked out. Let's all bow together.